The auditorium at Naval Base San Diego was full and perfectly arranged. Nearly 200 guests sat shoulder to shoulder in crisp dress uniforms, medals catching the light, programs folded neatly in their hands. A retirement ceremony was minutes from beginning. The mood was calm, proud, controlled. This was how these things always started. Then the last arrival entered the room. A 3-star admiral stepped through the side doors. Instantly, every person rose to their feet. Chairs scraped softly, spines straightened. Respect was automatic, practiced, unquestioned. He moved down the aisle without hurry, eyes forward, posture firm, until he reached the reserved front row seat marked for him. He stopped. He did not sit. He stood there, hands clasped behind his back, silent and unmoving. The ceremony staff glanced at one another. A commander leaned in and whispered that they were behind schedule. The admiral did not respond. The silence stretched past comfort, past protocol. People shifted. Breaths grew shallow. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. Finally, the admiral spoke, his voice calm and steady. The ceremony would not begin yet. Someone was missing. No explanation followed. No apology came. And in that moment, a single question filled the room. Who could possibly be important enough to stop a Navy ceremony? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to FOB Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Far from the quiet tension building inside the auditorium at Naval Base San Diego, Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Stone. Calder was standing over a steam table in the base cafeteria, doing what he had done almost every weekday for the last 15 years. He was in his late 70s now, his hair thin and white, his back no longer straight, but his movements were still deliberate, not slow from weakness. Slow from control. His hands told the real story. Thick fingers. Scarred knuckles. A faint tremor that appeared only when he stopped moving. When he worked, they were steady. When he lifted trays, wiped counters, or slid plates across the stainless steel line, there was a precision to it that never quite matched the job. The kind of precision that came from habit forged somewhere far more dangerous than a kitchen. To most people on base, he was just Stone, or sometimes simply Sir. A cafeteria worker in a navy blue uniform, white apron tied neatly, name tag clipped to his chest that read Elias. He had stopped correcting people years ago when they shortened it. Names were not important anymore. He had learned that early. Young sailors and Marines passed him every day without seeing him. They heard the scrape of trays, the clatter of utensils, the low hum of the kitchen. He blended into the background like machinery. Necessary, unnoticed, easily forgotten the moment they walked away. Calder did not resent it. When a young private came through the line looking exhausted, Calder would slide an extra piece of bread onto the tray without a word. When a nervous new recruit fumbled for their ID, Calder waited patiently, eyes calm, never rushing them. When laughter broke out at a nearby table, he did not turn to look. He had learned long ago that silence could be its own kind of discipline. Every so often, a young Marine would say, "Thank you," and mean it. Calder would nod once in response. Not because he was unfriendly, because he had spent a lifetime learning when words were unnecessary. He had no idea that 200 people were sitting in dress uniforms waiting for him. Inside the auditorium, Vice Admiral Thomas K.K. Holloway remained standing, still refusing the seat prepared for him. A 3-star flag officer with decades of command behind him, Holloway carried himself with a restraint that unsettled those around him. He did not fidget. He did not check his watch. He did not offer explanations to soothe discomfort. His silence was intentional. He knew exactly where Calder would be. He also knew what would happen if he explained too soon. The ceremony officer, Commander Rachel Monroe, had run dozens of events like this. She knew schedules, cues, protocols. She had never been in a room where a senior officer delayed a ceremony without explanation. Her training pushed her to solve problems quickly. This one refused to be solved. At Holloway's quiet instruction, a junior officer was dispatched. Lieutenant Mark Reyes was young, eager, and efficient. He moved through the lobby first, scanning faces, checking restrooms, stepping outside briefly. Nothing. No missing guest. No late arrival. When he returned, confusion was written plainly on his face. That was when Holloway gave him the detail that shifted everything. The man they were waiting for worked in the cafeteria. Reyes blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. A cafeteria worker did not belong on any list he had ever seen. But an order from a 3-star Admiral was not something you questioned. He turned and moved quickly toward the kitchen, uncertainty following him down the corridor. Back in the cafeteria, Calder finished wiping down a counter and hung the cloth carefully on its hook. He checked the serving line once more, making sure nothing was out of place. Routine mattered. Order mattered. Even now. When Lieutenant Reyes entered the kitchen, Calder noticed him immediately. Not because of rank, because of posture. Because of the way the young officer paused, unsure how to address a man who looked old enough to be his grandfather but stood like someone who had once commanded rooms. Reyes cleared his throat and asked if Elias Calder was present. Calder raised his eyes slowly. Yes, he said. There was no pride in the word, no curiosity. Just acknowledgement. As Reyes explained that someone was asking for him, Calder felt a faint tightening in his chest. Not fear, recognition. The kind that comes when the past stirs without warning. He untied his apron carefully, folding it the way he always did, and set it down. He did not ask why. As the base searched for a man most people never noticed, the gap between rank and meaning quietly widened. 200 people waited for a cafeteria worker they had passed 1,000 times. And somewhere between the kitchen and the auditorium, a truth long ignored was about to walk back into the light. The delay became official the moment the ceremony clock ticked past its start time. A low murmur spread through the auditorium, not loud enough to be disrespectful, but unmistakable. People leaned toward one another, whispering behind programs, glancing toward the stage where nothing was happening. This was not how military ceremonies worked. They began on time, every time. Commander Rachel Monroe stepped closer to the front row, her expression carefully neutral. She scanned the seats again, counting out of habit more than doubt. Every flag officer, every senior guest, every family member of consequence was already there. She leaned toward Vice Admiral Holloway and spoke softly, reminding him that the room was ready. Holloway did not turn his head. He repeated the same calm sentence, unchanged in tone or volume. Someone was missing. The words landed differently the second time. They were not a mistake. They were a statement. Monroe hesitated, then asked the question no one else dared to voice. Who were they waiting for? Holloway answered without hesitation. Elias Calder. The name drifted through the air and disappeared without finding purchase. No reaction followed, no nods, no recognition. The commander searched faces instinctively, hoping someone might show even the faintest sign of understanding. Nothing came back to her. It was as if the name belonged to no one at all. Lieutenant Reyes, standing just off to the side with a tablet in his hands, began scrolling through the guest list. He moved quickly, his thumb precise, eyes sharp. He checked once, then again. Then a third time, slower, just in case he had missed something obvious. There was no Elias Calder on the list. Reyes leaned toward the commander and shook his head. Monroe felt heat creep up her neck. A missing guest was one thing. A non-existent one was another. She turned back to the Admiral, choosing her words carefully, and said the name did not appear anywhere in the program. Holloway finally turned to face her. "Then the list is wrong," he said. There was no anger in his voice. That was what unsettled her most. A quiet ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Officers shifted in their seats. Families exchanged glances. This was no longer a simple delay. Something was unfolding that none of them had prepared for. On the stage, Captain Daniel Brooks stood behind the podium, his hands resting lightly on the wood. This was supposed to be his moment. 28 years of service distilled into speeches and applause. Instead, he stood there unsure of where to look, aware that every second stretched the awkwardness further. He glanced once toward the front row. The Admiral was still standing. Time pressed in from every direction. Schedules would slip. Other commitments would be affected. Monroe felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. She tried once more, asking if perhaps the Admiral would like them to proceed while the missing individual was located. Holloway did not respond to that either. He did not sit. He did not explain. He simply remained where he was, a fixed point of authority that refused to bend to convenience. The murmurs grew quieter, not louder. People stopped whispering because they sensed something larger at work. Confusion gave way to curiosity. Curiosity edged toward unease. Then Holloway spoke again. "The man we are waiting for works in the cafeteria." The sentence moved through the room like a shockwave. Heads lifted, eyes widened. Someone near the back let out a small, unguarded laugh before quickly stopping themselves. A cafeteria worker. The idea did not fit the setting. It clashed with dress uniforms and polished shoes and rows of medals. Captain Brooks looked genuinely stunned. Monroe felt her breath catch. Reyes froze, tablet still in his hands. The disconnect was immediate and uncomfortable. Would you assume a cafeteria worker mattered less than a decorated officer? The question hung there, unspoken but heavy, forcing its way into every mind in the room. The answer, for most people, was painfully honest. Holloway gave no one time to dwell on it. He turned his gaze toward Lieutenant Reyes and gave a single, precise nod. "Find him." Reyes straightened and moved quickly, the weight of the task settling on him as he left the auditorium. Behind him, the doors closed softly, sealing the room back into its tense quiet. Inside the cafeteria, Elias Calder was nearing the end of his shift. The lunch rush had thinned, leaving only a few scattered tables occupied by sailors lingering over coffee. Calder wiped down the counter slowly, methodically, as he always did. He checked the condiment station, straightened a stack of trays, and replaced a napkin holder that had been knocked slightly out of line. Routine grounded him. He was unaware that a room full of officers was arguing about his absence. Back in the auditorium, the silence pressed harder. Without the distraction of whispered conversations, people were left alone with their thoughts. Monroe stood rigid, hands clasped behind her back, eyes forward. Captain Brooks stepped away from the podium slightly, unsure whether to remain on stage or retreat. Holloway remained unmoving. Minutes passed. Someone near the aisle checked their watch and then quickly lowered their arm, embarrassed at the instinct. Another guest exhaled sharply, the sound too loud in the quiet room. No one spoke. The Admiral did not look at the clock. In the hallway outside the cafeteria, Lieutenant Reyes slowed his pace. Doubt crept in despite himself. He had spent his short career learning who mattered and who did not, how rank dictated gravity. This assignment challenged every assumption he had carried in with him. He pushed through the cafeteria doors. The smell of food and cleaning solution filled the air. The noise was subdued now, almost peaceful. Reyes scanned the room, unsure what he was looking for. An elderly man in a food service uniform wiped down a table near the back, his movements unhurried. Something about the way the man stood caught Reyes's attention. He approached cautiously, clearing his throat. "Excuse me, sir." Calder looked up. "Yes." Reyes introduced himself and asked if his name was Elias Calder. There was no hesitation in the answer. "Yes." Reyes explained that there was a ceremony waiting and that someone important had requested his presence. Calder studied the young lieutenant for a moment, reading the uncertainty in his posture. He did not ask who. He did not ask why. He nodded once. Back in the auditorium, the tension reached a quiet peak. People sat straighter without realizing it. Monroe felt the weight of every eye in the room, all of them wondering if the Admiral would eventually concede. Then the doors at the back of the room opened. Footsteps echoed faintly across the floor, slow and measured, moving closer. Lieutenant Reyes slowed his pace as he approached the older man near the serving line. Up close, the uncertainty grew stronger, not weaker. The cafeteria worker did not slump or fidget the way Reyes expected. He stood upright, balanced, as if waiting to be addressed rather than surprised by it. Reyes spoke carefully, respectful without knowing why. He explained that someone at a ceremony had asked for Elias Calder by name. The words sounded strange even as he said them, as if they belonged to another context entirely. Calder's first thought was not pride, it was consequence. He assumed he had done something wrong, maybe paperwork, maybe a mistake he had not noticed. He nodded once, slow and measured, and said he would come. There was no argument in him. There never had been. Before stepping away, Calder untied his apron. He folded it neatly, edge to edge, smoothing it once with his palm before placing it on the counter. The motion was practiced and exact, the kind of small discipline that had nothing to do with kitchens and everything to do with habit, Reyes noticed. As they walked, Calder kept his hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders back despite the stiffness in his joints. When Reyes spoke again, Calder turned fully to face him, feet planted, attention complete. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A Marine habit no man in his late 70s should still carry unless it had been carved into him long ago. They moved down the corridor in silence. Calder did not ask where they were going. He did not ask who wanted him. He focused on his breathing, steady and controlled, the same way he had learned to do when uncertainty pressed in. The base felt different from this angle. Hallways he had walked 1,000 times now seemed narrower, quieter. Outside the auditorium doors, Reyes hesitated. He explained again that the event had been delayed, that a senior officer had requested Calder personally. The explanation did not clarify anything. It only deepened the sense that Calder did not belong where he was being taken. He considered telling Reyes he should go back alone. He considered saying there had been a mistake. He did neither. The doors opened. Inside, the room shifted almost instantly. Conversations died mid-breath. Programs lowered. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the back of the auditorium, drawn by the presence of a man who clearly did not match the setting. Calder stepped inside in his cafeteria uniform, plain and faded, the blue fabric worn soft with years. His shoes were practical, not polished. He felt the weight of the stairs settle on him like a physical thing. No one announced his name. No one explained why he was there. He stood just inside the doorway, unsure whether to move forward or retreat. His instinct told him to leave quietly before becoming a disruption. His feet did not obey. From the front row, Vice Admiral Holloway lifted his gaze. Their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, the years collapsed inward. Calder saw recognition there, sharp and undeniable, and something else beneath it. Gratitude, regret, resolve. Holloway did not smile. He did not nod. He simply held Calder in his sight, as if anchoring him in place. Calder felt his chest tighten. He stood straighter without meaning to. The crowd sensed it too, the way tension thickened rather than released. This was no accidental interruption. This was deliberate, intentional. Whatever was about to happen had been waiting for this man to enter the room. Calder's hands curled briefly, then relaxed again. He kept his gaze forward, refusing to look around at the faces studying him. He had spent a lifetime not drawing attention. Old instincts urged him to disappear. They failed him now. The doors closed softly behind him, sealing him inside the silence. 200 people watched. No one spoke. No one moved. Calder stood frozen beneath their attention, a cafeteria worker in the wrong room at the wrong time. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew this moment was not accidental at all. Vice Admiral Holloway moved first. He did not call out. He did not wave Calder forward like a man summoning an employee. He simply stepped away from the front row and began walking down the aisle, slow and deliberate, as if the entire room belonged to silence until he arrived. 200 people tracked him with their eyes. The sound of his shoes against the floor was soft, but it carried. Commander Monroe stood rigid near the stage, her mind racing through every protocol rule she had ever learned, none of them fitting what she was watching. Calder remained at the back, still in his cafeteria uniform, posture stiff with confusion. He expected a quiet conversation, a correction, maybe a reprimand. The idea that the highest-ranking officer in the room was walking toward him did not make sense. Holloway stopped an arm's length away. He did not offer a hand. He came to full attention. The movement was sharp and unmistakable, a formal posture that drew a line through every assumption in the room. Then, with precision and gravity, Vice Admiral Holloway raised his hand and delivered a crisp salute to the elderly cafeteria worker. The auditorium froze. You could feel the air change, like pressure shifting before a storm. Someone near the front sucked in a breath too loudly. A few guests blinked as if they had misread the scene. Even Captain Brooks on the stage seemed unable to move. Calder stared at the Admiral's raised hand for a fraction of a second, stunned, then his body answered before his mind could. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted. His right hand rose in one smooth motion and returned the salute with a worn but flawless instinct. Not stiff. Not exaggerated. Real. The kind of motion that lived deeper than age, deeper than years of quiet work. For a heartbeat, it was as if an invisible uniform settled back onto him. Holloway lowered his hand and spoke in a voice meant for the entire room to hear. Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Stone, Calder. United States Marine Corps, retired. The words hit like a gavel. Stone. Not sir, not cafeteria worker, not that older man from the lunch line, a call sign spoken by a 3-star admiral with the weight of memory behind it. Calder's throat tightened. His eyes stayed steady, but something in his face shifted, the faintest flicker of discomfort, as if being named that way in public was a kind of exposure he had spent years avoiding. Commander Monroe took a small step forward, half on instinct, half on panic. "Sir," she began. Holloway did not look at her. He lifted a hand slightly, a quiet signal that ended the interruption before it could form. Then he turned back to Calder and did something even more shocking. He gestured toward the front row seat reserved for him. "Take my seat, Gunny." The word Gunny, spoken by a Navy admiral, landed with a reverence that made people sit straighter without understanding why. Calder's eyes flicked toward the seat, then back to Holloway, as if waiting for the correction that should follow. It did not come. Calder shook his head once, barely. Not defiance. Disbelief. He started to speak, but Holloway cut him off with quiet firmness. "That seat is yours today." There was no argument possible in that tone. Holloway had commanded ships, fleets, war rooms. This was the same voice, steady and final. Calder's hands flexed once at his sides. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. As he walked down the aisle, the crowd parted with their eyes. People who had once watched him slide trays across a counter now watched him as if they were seeing him for the first time. His uniform looked suddenly out of place in a different way, not as something cheap in a formal room, but as a reminder of how easily the world misses what matters. When Calder reached the front row, he hesitated again. Holloway remained standing. Only when Calder lowered himself carefully into the seat did the Admiral step back and take a position just beside him, still refusing to sit. It was not arrogance. It was deference. Commander Monroe swallowed hard, then turned back toward the stage with a professionalism that was beginning to fracture. She signaled the band. The colors remained posted. The ceremony resumed, but nothing about it felt normal anymore. Captain Brooks returned to the podium, eyes scanning the room briefly before landing on Calder. The captain's prepared remarks suddenly looked too small for what had just happened. He cleared his throat, began speaking, and tried to regain rhythm. The audience listened, but their attention kept pulling back to the front row. To the cafeteria workers sitting where a 3-star admiral should be. To the admiral standing at his side as if guarding him. Every sentence of the ceremony now carried an undercurrent of unanswered truth. When Captain Brooks finished the first portion of his remarks, the applause came, but it was uneven, distracted. People clapped because they were supposed to, because the uniform demanded it, but their eyes kept returning to Calder. The room was no longer celebrating one retirement. It was waiting for an explanation. That was when Holloway stepped forward. Commander Monroe stiffened, recognizing immediately that this was not on the program. She turned slightly as if to intervene, then stopped. The Admiral had not asked permission. He did not need it. He moved to the podium, placed both hands lightly on the sides, and looked out over the room. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which made it more powerful. "Most of you do not know who that man is," he said, gesturing toward Calder without looking at him. "That is our failure." The room went still again. Holloway did not list accomplishments like a recruiter. He did not turn Calder into a legend for entertainment. He spoke with the controlled weight of someone laying down truth. Elias Calder served nearly 3 decades in the Marine Corps. He carried men through the worst days of their lives and never once asked for applause. Calder's jaw tightened. His eyes stayed forward, fixed on nothing. Holloway paused, then spoke the line that cracked the room open. "He saved my life." No dramatic flourish followed. No raised voice. Just the simple fact, delivered like a report. The Admiral's gaze unfocused slightly as memory took him. Vietnam, 1969. He described it with restraint, not for shock, but for honesty. A young officer, barely grown into his rank, stepping into a war zone with confidence he had not earned. He had been assigned to operate alongside Marines near Da Nang, eager to prove himself, not yet understanding what war demanded of the people under him. Calder had been there. Not as a quiet cafeteria worker, but as a platoon sergeant. The kind of Marine who carried authority without needing to announce it. The kind who watched young officers closely, not to challenge them, but to keep them from making mistakes that killed men. Holloway spoke about the first days, how Calder corrected him without humiliating him, how he taught him what leadership looked like when bullets were real, how he made him eat when he forgot, how he checked his gear like a father checking a child's coat before winter. Then Holloway's voice lowered slightly, and the room leaned in. 3 weeks into that deployment, they walked into an ambush. The jungle had been quiet. Too quiet. Holloway admitted he froze when the first shots came. Not for long. Only long enough for it to matter. A figure broke through the smoke and chaos, closing the distance with lethal intent. Holloway saw the weapon aimed at his chest. He could not move fast enough. Calder did not hesitate. The older man in the front row, sitting in a cafeteria uniform, had once launched himself into that moment without thinking. Holloway described it not as heroism, but as instinct. Calder tackled the attacker, drove him down, and took the impact meant for a younger man who did not yet know what it meant to die. Calder had been hit in the shoulder in the struggle. A wound that shattered bone and left damage that never truly healed. Holloway said he remembered the blood, the pain in Calder's face, and the fact that Calder never once looked at his own injury. Instead, he looked around. "Where are my Marines?" he had demanded, voice steady even as his body failed him. Holloway described how the firefight continued for hours, how evacuation was offered, how Calder refused until every man was accounted for, how he kept issuing orders, kept moving, kept dragging wounded men toward cover even as his own arm hung useless. Not because he wanted medals, because leaving early meant leaving someone behind. Holloway's voice tightened, the first visible crack in his composure. "Everything I learned about leadership," he said, "came from that man. Not from books, not from speeches. From watching him bleed and still choose responsibility." Silence filled the auditorium so completely it felt like prayer. Calder sat motionless, eyes forward, shoulders slightly rigid. He did not look at Holloway. He did not seek the crowd's reaction. If anything, he looked smaller under the attention, as if he wished the floor would swallow him back into quiet. Holloway took a breath and continued. He said he had tried to find Calder over the years. Promotions came. Commands changed. Addresses disappeared. Life moved forward the way it always does for men who survive. Then Holloway delivered the final detail that turned the room's shock into something heavier. 3 months ago, he said, I walked into this base cafeteria. I stood in line like everyone else, and Elias Calder was there, serving food, wearing a name tag that simply said, Stone. He paused, and I walked past him. A murmur tried to rise and died immediately. Holloway's eyes swept the crowd. I will not walk past him again, he said quietly. And neither will this base. The truth settled into the room, changing everything. 200 people sat in silence, realizing that the man they had ignored for years had once carried lives on his back. And now he had been feeding them, quietly, every day, while they never asked what he had carried. Vice Admiral Holloway remained at the podium, his hands resting lightly against the wood, his voice steady again after the weight of memory passed. He did not embellish what came next. He did not raise his tone or search for dramatic effect. He simply laid out facts, the way reports are written when truth is enough. Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Calder served 28 years in the United States Marine Corps. Infantry. Platoon Sergeant. Trainer of Marines who went on to fight wars most of the room had only read about. He completed multiple combat deployments in Southeast Asia and later conflicts, returning each time with fewer men than he left with and more responsibility than he ever claimed. Holloway mentioned the decorations without pause or flourish. A Silver Star for gallantry. Bronze Stars earned during sustained combat leadership. Purple Hearts received not because Calder sought danger, but because danger found him while he was protecting others. Each award was spoken plainly, stripped of ceremony, as if the Admiral understood that the meaning lived in the moments behind them, not in the medal itself. As the list ended, something changed in the room. The shock that had frozen faces earlier gave way to a deeper stillness. No one whispered now. No one shifted in their seat. It was the kind of silence that arrives when understanding finally catches up to reality. People began to see Calder clearly for the first time, not as a cafeteria worker who had wandered into the wrong room, but as a Marine who had shaped lives, saved lives, and then stepped quietly out of the way when the fighting ended. The hierarchy in the auditorium did not collapse. It simply rearranged itself. Ranks still mattered. Uniforms still carried authority, but meaning settled elsewhere now, heavier and more permanent. Calder felt the attention like a physical weight. His hands rested on his knees, fingers interlaced, knuckles pale. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to meet the stares that now carried something close to reverence. This was never what he wanted. Recognition had always made him uneasy. It demanded something back. He gave nothing, no speech, no nod, no acknowledgement beyond remaining seated where he had been told to sit. His discomfort was visible, not from fear, but from humility honed over a lifetime of choosing duty over applause. Vice Admiral Holloway stepped back from the podium and returned to his place beside Calder, still standing, still silent. The room understood now. They had not been waiting for a missing guest. They had been waiting for the truth. Captain Daniel Brooks stepped forward before anyone else could speak. He did not rush. He did not look to the program or the ceremony officer for permission. He looked only at the man seated in the front row, still wearing a cafeteria uniform that no longer looked out of place. Gunny Calder, Captain Brooks said quietly, his voice carrying without effort. Would you stand with me? For a moment, Calder did not move. The request felt heavier than any order he had received that day. He had already been seen more than he ever wanted to be. But Brooks waited, not as an officer demanding compliance, but as a fellow servant offering respect. Calder pushed himself to his feet. The sound that followed was not applause at first. It was chairs moving. one after another. Then, all at once, the entire auditorium rose. 200 people stood in unison, the motion rippling forward like a tide. The applause came after, strong and sustained, not sharp or celebratory, but deep and steady. It filled the room and stayed there, refusing to fade. No one checked their watch. No one looked away. This was not protocol. This was recognition. Calder stood beside Captain Brooks, hands at his sides, shoulders slightly tense. His face remained composed, but his jaw worked subtly, the only sign that the moment was pressing against him harder than he liked. He did not bow. He did not smile. He endured the way Marines do. Vice Admiral Holloway stepped forward once more. He did not speak. From the inside pocket of his dress uniform, he removed a small presentation case. He opened it carefully and revealed a single medal, not a replacement. Not an official reissue. Something symbolic. Something chosen for this moment alone. Holloway stepped close to Calder and pinned the medal directly onto the front of the cafeteria apron, just above the faint stains of honest work. The contrast was stark. Polished metal against worn fabric. History against humility. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The applause softened, then slowly settled into silence, not because anyone was instructed to stop, but because the image in front of them demanded quiet. Faces in the crowd changed. Pride gave way to reflection. Awe settled into something gentler. Respect. Some eyes glistened. Others stared without blinking, memorizing the scene as if they understood instinctively that this was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Calder stood still, eyes forward, breathing slow and controlled. He did not look at the medal. He did not touch it. If anything, he looked slightly embarrassed by it, as if the attention were a miscalculation he had not planned for. Captain Brooks remained beside him, posture relaxed, presence steady. The Admiral stepped back half a pace, giving Calder the space he had earned without ever asking for. The room held the moment carefully. This was the peak. Not loud, not theatrical, just real. A Marine who had carried men through war, then carried Trays through quiet years, standing honored in a place that had almost missed him entirely. Long after the applause faded, the image remained. A 3-star admiral standing beside a cafeteria worker, and everyone finally understanding why. When the ceremony ended, the room did not empty the way it usually did. There was no rush toward exits, no sudden noise of conversations breaking loose all at once. People lingered. Small clusters formed. Voices stayed low, as if everyone understood that something fragile had just passed through the space and deserved care. Calder sat for a moment longer than necessary, then stood slowly and stepped away from the front row. The medal still rested against his apron, catching light he did not want. He moved toward the side of the room, hoping to disappear back into the margins where he felt most comfortable. He did not make it far. A young Marine corporal approached him, hesitant, posture unsure. The corporal's voice shook slightly as he spoke, not from fear, but from sincerity. He said he had eaten in the cafeteria countless times. He said he never knew. Then he asked the question that sat heavy in the room. Why did you never tell anyone? Calder looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were calm, steady, unguarded. He did not answer right away, not because he was searching for words, but because he wanted to choose the right ones. Service doesn't need an audience, he said finally. The corporal nodded, but Calder continued, gently. After the fighting stops, you still have to live with what you carried. I didn't need to be thanked for it. I needed to be useful. Serving food kept me close to the people still wearing the uniform. It let me take care of them without carrying a rifle. There was no bitterness in his voice, no regret. Only certainty. He told the corporal that purpose does not disappear when the uniform comes off. It changes shape. It becomes quieter. Less visible, but no less real. The corporal swallowed hard and thanked him. Calder nodded once in return, the exchange complete. As the room slowly returned to normal, the narrator's reflection settled in. The strongest people are often the ones who do not announce themselves. The deepest sacrifices are rarely spoken aloud. Calder had walked among them every day, not asking for recognition, not needing it. He understood something many never learn. Rank commands attention. Character earns reverence. That was the lesson the room would carry forward. Not the medal, not the speeches, but the understanding that true service does not end when the uniform comes off. It simply finds a quieter way to keep going. Somewhere today, a hero is standing in line, wiping a counter, fixing a door, or driving home without a single person knowing what they once carried. They do not wear medals in public. They do not correct assumptions. They move quietly, believing the work is what matters, not the recognition. That day at the Navy ceremony did not pause because of protocol or rank. It paused because one man refused to sit until meaning was acknowledged. A 3-star admiral stayed standing so the truth could walk into the room and take its place. Most of us walk past courage without realizing it. The question is whether we choose to see it when it stands in front of us. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more FOB veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.